The clock on the wall clicked loudly, as if it was mocking me for still being alive. My body ached from the surgery. Every stretch of my ribs reminded me of the fresh stitches holding me together. The nurse entered, her smile soft, her tone too gentle, as if she knew kindness was the only thing keeping me upright. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "you're free to go home today." Home. That word should have warmed me. Instead, it felt sharp, almost cruel. I reached for my phone. One call would be enough, I told myself. My son knew what time I'd be discharged. He promised me he'd be there. Surely he hadn't forgotten. The first call went straight to voicemail. The second did too. By the third attempt, my hands trembled. I pressed the phone hard against my ear, praying for his voice. The line connected, and then dropped. On the fourth, the phone rang, but no one answered. My heart sank. On the fifth call, I finally heard my son's voice. But it wasn't relief that came, it was a knife. "Why are you calling again?" Daniel's voice was sharp, annoyed, like I was a telemarketer selling him something worthless. And then I heard her. Vanessa. Her laugh in the background, cold and mocking. What does she want now? Another ride? She's like a stray dog, keeps coming back no matter how many times you push her away. Daniel chuckled. My own son. My only child. He didn't defend me. He didn't scold her. He joined her. Then he said it, his voice heavy with irritation. "Don't call us every 5 minutes. We're not your taxi, Mom." The line clicked dead. For a long moment, I just stared at my phone screen. My stitches pulled with each shaky breath, but the pain in my chest was worse. The nurse returned, holding my discharge papers. Her voice carried kindness, but it felt wasted on me. "Will your family be here soon?" she asked. I couldn't let her know the truth. Couldn't admit that my own son had abandoned me, so I lied. "Yes, they'll be here shortly." She left me alone to gather my things. I folded my hospital gown carefully, as if neatness could cover the emptiness inside me. My canvas bag felt too light. Clothes, papers, nothing else. No gifts from family. No flowers waiting on the table. Just silence. When I looked at myself in the mirror by the sink, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale skin, hollow eyes. A body stitched together, but a heart falling apart. I walked slowly to the entrance, every step pulling at my stitches. Outside, the air was sharp with late November chill. A yellow cab pulled up. The driver couldn't have been older than 20. His nervous energy filled the silence as he carried my bag to the trunk. "Heading home to family?" he asked casually, trying to make conversation. I looked out the window at the bare Vermont trees, their branches reaching upward like skeleton fingers. "No," I said softly. "Not to family." He glanced at me in the mirror, puzzled, but said nothing more. The car rattled forward. I let the silence fill the ride. The taxi dropped me off at a small rental office 3 miles away. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed faintly. I signed the papers with a hand that shook more than I wanted to admit. The clerk handed me the keys to a car that had clearly lived through better years. A beat-up Corolla. The seats smelled faintly of old cigarettes and cheap pine cleaner. I slid into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirror. That's when I saw her. Me, a woman too pale, too tired, with shadows under her eyes. A woman who looked erased in pencil, waiting to be redrawn but forgotten. I started the engine. It sputtered before it caught. The road stretched out like gray ribbons between dark trees. The winter sky hung low, bruised with heavy clouds. I drove slowly, each bump in the road tugging at my stitches. I kept the radio off. I didn't want music. I didn't want noise. I wanted memory, and memory came. I remembered waking up at 4 every Christmas morning to bake cinnamon rolls before Daniel padded down the stairs in his little pajamas. I remembered selling my engagement ring, the silver one Edward gave me, so Daniel could pay his first semester of college tuition. I remembered holding his hand when he broke his leg in high school, whispering comfort as they set the bone. I remembered standing stone still at Edward's funeral, holding myself together so Daniel wouldn't collapse. Every sacrifice came back to me, one after another, like ghosts riding in the passenger seat. And now? Now I was alone, driving through the Vermont countryside, with nothing waiting for me at home except silence. As the road wound forward, I pictured my house, the one Edward and I built together, the one I had tended for over 4 decades. The lilac bushes he planted by the porch, the creaking steps we once sat on during summer evenings, That was supposed to be home, my safe place. But in my gut, I already knew. Home was no longer mine. The real wound was waiting for me at the end of that drive. The sky was dimming when I turned into my neighborhood. The houses stood in neat rows, their porch lights glowing against the gray Vermont evening. Families were gathering inside for dinner. Windows glowed warm, and the smell of firewood drifted from chimneys. Then I saw my house. My home. The porch light was on, just as it always had been when I came back from the hospital with Edward years ago, or when Daniel returned from college. For a brief moment, my chest lifted with hope. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe they were waiting for me after all. I parked in the driveway, bracing my aching ribs as I stepped out. The air carried the faint smell of lilacs, though the bushes were bare for winter. My hand tightened around my house key. I pressed it into the lock. It didn't turn. I pulled it out, tried again. My heart sped faster with each failed attempt. The key slid in but refused to move, like the house itself was rejecting me. I knocked softly at first, the sound nearly lost in the wind. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice thin. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. My stitches burned with the effort. Behind the curtains, I saw movement, a shadow. Someone was inside. Then her voice cut through the glass like a blade. "Margaret, you're not supposed to be here." Vanessa. Sharp, cruel, and clear. "You should have stayed at the hospital, or better yet, found yourself a retirement home. They'd love you there. Free pudding, soft blankets, and no one forced to breathe in your dust." Her words stung worse than my stitches. I pressed my hand against the doorframe, steadying myself. "Vanessa, please. Let me talk to Daniel," she laughed, a sound without warmth. "Honestly, this house smells better without you. No mothballs, no martyrdom. Just fresh air." Behind her, I saw movement on the staircase. My son, Daniel, stepped into view. My breath caught. For one moment, hope lit in my chest. He was right there. Just one step forward and he could open the door. He could call me Mom the way he used to. He could remind me I still belonged, but he didn't. He turned. He walked back into the shadows. The porch light flicked off. Darkness swallowed me. The cold Vermont drizzle seeped into my collar, sliding down my back like icy fingers. My hands trembled against the doorframe. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there staring at the house that no longer wanted me. Finally, I stepped back. My shoes slid on the wet concrete. My breath fogged in the night air. The house was no longer mine. My son was no longer mine. I walked back to the car, every step heavier than the last. My coat clung to me, wet with rain and regret. When I looked at the house one final time, it wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress with my son on the inside and me locked out forever. The only motel in town still accepted cash. Its neon sign flickered, the word vacancy blinking like a dying heartbeat. The girl at the front desk didn't ask questions. She slid a key across the counter and pointed down a narrow hallway. Room 12 smelled faintly of mildew, as if the walls themselves had been damp for years. The bedspread was coarse, the carpet thin and stained. I dropped my canvas bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence press against me. No television. No phone calls. No family, just me. I whispered to the empty room. They changed the locks. The words echoed back, small and weak. Then I added, "Sharper this time, so I will change everything else." Lying back against the stiff pillow, I closed my eyes. And that's when I saw him, Edward. I remembered the day he proposed. Not with a diamond ring like others, but with something that meant more. A silver button, polished and simple. He had held it out with that quiet smile of his. "You'll wear this more than a ring," he said. "It's for a woman who makes, not just wears." I laughed back then, but I wore that button around my neck for years. It was our promise, our love stitched into something simple but lasting. And then I remembered his last warning, whispered in the hospital bed as his hand grew weaker in mine. "Keep the land in your name, Margaret. If something happens, protect yourself." People change. At the time, I thought he was being cautious. But lying there in that motel, I realized he had seen this coming. He had known long before I ever did that love could rot. That family could turn into strangers. The rain outside tapped steadily against the window, like a metronome keeping time with my thoughts. I touched the stitches beneath my sweater. Each one was meant to hold me together, but they couldn't fix the tear inside me. My son had walked away. My daughter-in-law had laughed in my face. My home had spat me out like I was nothing, but Edward's voice lingered. Protect yourself. And as I lay there in that shabby motel room, I realized that protection wasn't just about land or money. It was about dignity. It was about reminding them and myself that I still mattered. I wasn't gone yet. I wasn't erased, not if I chose to fight. Not all abuse comes with shouting. Some of it comes dressed as laughter. I remembered the first time Vanessa mocked me at the dinner table. I had made chicken soup the way Edward used to love it. Fresh carrots, thyme, and dumplings. It was a recipe older than my marriage, carried down from my grandmother. Vanessa spooned it, sniffed, then looked across the table with a smile too sharp to be polite. This tastes like the kind of thing they'd serve in a nursing home. The guests laughed. Even Daniel chuckled nervously as if agreeing would keep the peace. I smiled back, lips tight, swallowing the sting with my soup. But that night I lay awake, replaying her words again and again. It wasn't just soup she was mocking. It was me. It didn't stop at food. Vanessa invited her friends over more often. They came in loud, perfumed clouds of chatter and laughter, carrying expensive handbags and words that cut like glass. One evening, as I served coffee in delicate china cups, one of her friends looked at me with an almost pitying smile. So sweet of you, Margaret. You're like a legacy decoration, like the grandfather clock in the hall. Something old, something you keep around for history. The group giggled. Vanessa didn't defend me. She leaned in, smirking, and said, "Exactly. She's part of the house now. Like wallpaper." I stood there holding the coffee pot, burning inside. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I only poured more coffee and disappeared back into the kitchen. The cruelest wound came from Daniel. One evening, I asked him why he no longer spoke with me, why he always deferred to Vanessa in decisions. His answer was sharp, his tone defensive. "You never trusted me, Mom. You always think Vanessa and I are against you. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe you just don't want me to be happy." The words fell heavy. I wanted to remind him of every sacrifice. How I gave up my engagement ring so he could pay tuition. How I worked double shifts in the sewing shop to keep the house afloat. But I said nothing. Because in that moment, I realized something. He believed her. He believed Vanessa's story over mine. My son had been rewritten by another woman's hand. The next wound wasn't words. It was silence. One morning, I came downstairs and noticed something missing from the mantel. Edward's picture, the one from our 30th anniversary, where his smile was soft and proud, was gone. In its place was a decorative vase, white and shiny, perfectly in line with Vanessa's modern aesthetic. When I asked where the picture had gone, Vanessa shrugged. It didn't fit with the new design. I stored it in the attic. Don't worry, Margaret. We'll keep it safe. But honestly, this house needs to look like it belongs in this decade, not the last one. The words stung. But the act cut deeper. Edward's face had been erased from the living room. Erased from sight. Erased from memory. Soon Vanessa began posting pictures of the redecorated house online. The white walls, the glass furniture, the sterile shine of a space that no longer held history. Her captions were smug. Finally modernizing this old house. Out with the past. In with the future. Her followers praised her. Comments rolled in, so chic. Looks so fresh and new, as if my years there were a disease that needed disinfecting. I scrolled through those photos at night, hidden in my room, watching strangers applaud my erasure. The final straw wasn't a picture or a post. It was the sound of laughter I wasn't invited to. I remembered one Thanksgiving. I could hear them downstairs, Daniel, Vanessa, and their friends. The table was set, the silverware clinking, wine glasses rising in toasts, but there was no place set for me. When I stepped into the doorway, Vanessa raised her eyebrows. "Oh, Margaret. We thought you were resting. This is kind of a younger crowd dinner." Daniel didn't even look at me. I turned back to my room, my footsteps heavy. I closed the door quietly so they wouldn't hear how my hands shook. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat in silence, staring at the wall. I realized then that I wasn't part of the family anymore. I wasn't even part of the house. I was a ghost, haunting the rooms of a life I had built. Now, lying in that motel room, the memories pressed against me like heavy weights. The mildew smell, the scratchy blanket, The silence, it all mirrored the way I had lived in that house. Present but invisible. For years I had been erased slowly. Not with one act, but with many small cuts. A cruel laugh, a missing picture, an empty chair, and now I was completely gone. I stared at the cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater. For the first time, I let myself admit it. They wanted me gone. They had been pushing me out for years, but something else stirred in me. A spark. Edward's words echoed again. Protect yourself. People change. I had been a ghost too long. It was time to stop fading. I sat up in bed, my ribs aching, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. They had changed the locks. They had mocked my meals. They had erased Edward, but they had forgotten one thing. I was still alive, and ghosts, once awakened, can haunt louder than the living. That night, for the first time, I didn't think of myself as a victim. I thought of myself as a fighter. Quiet, patient, deliberate, but dangerous in my silence. Ghosts don't scream. Ghosts watch. And I had decided to become a ghost with eyes. Weeks before they pushed me out, when the insults had grown sharper and my place in the house had nearly vanished, I installed a small camera in the upstairs hallway. It was no bigger than a thumb hidden inside a vent cover. It wasn't courage that made me do it. It was survival. Edward's voice had haunted me long enough. Protect yourself, Margaret. People change. If Vanessa and Daniel wanted to erase me, then I would let them, but I would keep the record. I would keep proof. The motel television barely worked, but I didn't need it. I had my laptop, my USB cord, and hours of footage from the house I once called home. I watched. At first, the cruelty was small. Vanessa rolling her eyes as she walked past my room. Daniel ignoring me when I spoke. Their friends whispering jokes about the old woman upstairs. Then came the theft. My knitting bag vanished. Edward's old toolbox disappeared from the shed. When I asked, Vanessa told me I must have misplaced them. But the footage showed her carrying them to the curb, smiling as if she was throwing away trash. Daniel said nothing. He never stopped her. The recording showed everything. My son's silence, Vanessa's cruelty, the slow dismantling of my existence. And then came Halloween, the night that sealed everything. I watched the footage with my hands trembling over the keyboard. Vanessa had dressed up for their party, not as a witch, not as a ghost, but as me. A gray wig, a knitted shawl around her shoulders, and an oxygen tube taped clumsily under her nose. The room erupted with laughter. Daniel stood in the corner with his phone, recording her as she shuffled across the living room, mocking the limp in my walk. "Look, everyone!" Vanessa shouted. "It's Margaret the mummy, still clinging to life, haunting the house." Daniel laughed. "My son, my blood." His voice rose above the rest as he shouted, "Careful! Don't trip over her guilt. She'll use it to buy another 20 years. The guests cheered. They clapped. They raised their glasses. I sat frozen in that motel room, watching strangers celebrate my death while I was still alive. When the video ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in silence, staring at the screen. I reached for a USB drive from my bag. My hands shook as I copied the files. The theft, the mocking, the Halloween cruelty. Each progress bar felt like a heartbeat. When it finished, I held the drive tightly in my palm. It wasn't just plastic. It was truth. It was proof. It was my weapon. The church garden was quiet that afternoon, the benches wet with dew. Clara Whitmore was already waiting for me. She was younger than me by a decade, a woman I had once helped years ago when she was going through her own storm. When she saw me, her eyes softened. "Margaret, you look tired." "I am," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was steady, even. I pulled the USB from my coat pocket and pressed it into her hand. "If anything happens to me," I whispered, "this is why." Clara frowned, looking at the small drive like it was heavier than gold. "Margaret." "What is this?" "Proof," I said simply. "Proof that my own family has erased me." She nodded, understanding more than my words. She tucked the USB into her purse and placed her hand over mine. "You're not alone." For the first time in months, I felt the faintest warmth of safety. That night, as I left the church, the sky began to open. Snowflakes drifted down, soft and slow, blanketing the dark Vermont streets. The first snowfall of the year. I stopped under a street lamp and tilted my face upward. The flakes melted against my skin, cold but clean. Snow always meant a new season, a new start. And in that moment, I made my decision. Banks always smelled the same, like paper, polish, and quiet secrets. I walked through the marble lobby of the Burlington branch, my steps careful but deliberate. My ribs still ached, but something inside me had hardened. I wasn't here as a victim anymore. I was here as someone ready to reclaim what was mine. The clerk led me into a private room. I handed over the key Edward had pressed into my hand years ago. His voice still echoed in my memory. If anything ever feels wrong, Margaret, this is where you'll find your strength. The steel drawer slid out with a heavy clank. Inside was a stack of neatly folded documents untouched for years. My hands trembled as I pulled them free. Among them was the amendment Edward had signed and notarized, long before his illness had taken him. His handwriting was steady, his signature bold. The clause was simple, powerful. If I were ever mistreated or denied dignity in my own home, all financial and property rights would revert solely to me. I pressed my fingers over his signature. My late husband had seen what I couldn't. He had left me a lifeline, a way to fight. Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't of grief. They were of resolve. The office was small, tucked above a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and butter. The brass plaque on the door read, Sophia Ramirez, attorney at law. I climbed the stairs slowly, clutching Edward's documents in one hand and my worn canvas bag in the other. Inside, a young woman with sharp eyes and dark hair pulled into a bun looked up from her desk. Mrs. Hale, she asked, rising to shake my hand. I nodded. You must be Sophia. Her grip was firm, steady. I remember you, she said softly. When my father was ill, you were the one who sewed his suit for the funeral. You didn't even charge us, I blinked, surprised. I hadn't remembered. But she had. That's why I said yes to this meeting, Sophia continued. Now tell me what they've done. I laid the documents, the USB, and my journals on her desk. She listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowing at every detail. Vanessa's mockery, Daniel's silence, the lockout, the Halloween humiliation. When I finished, my voice was hoarse. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the bakery oven below. Sophia leaned forward, her tone precise. This isn't just cruelty, Mrs. Hale. This is elder abuse, neglect, emotional harm. And with these documents, you have more power than they realize? For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Sophia spread the documents across the desk, arranging them like puzzle pieces. Here's how we build this, she said. First, we file for elder abuse and emotional damages. That covers the mistreatment. Second, we use the notarized amendment to prove that your late husband intended you to retain control if you were ever mistreated. Third, we secure witnesses, your nurse, your friend Clara, maybe even others from the neighborhood who saw what happened. She tapped the USB. And this? This is the nail in their coffin. No jury, no judge will watch that footage and side with them. Her confidence filled the small office, making it feel larger than any courtroom. Mrs. Hale, she said, locking eyes with me, you're not powerless. You've been patient. You've endured. But now it's time to fight. The words settled in me like armor. That night in the motel, I sat at the small wooden desk with a pen and paper. The heater rattled, the air smelled faintly of mildew, but my mind was clear. At the top of the page, I wrote, final things. The list began simple, secure documents, trust Sophia, protect the evidence, but as I wrote, the items grew sharper. Reclaim the house, restore Edward's name, show Daniel who I really am. My hand trembled as I wrote the last line, but when I set the pen down, the words stared back at me like fire. Change everything. I folded the paper carefully, sliding it into my journal. The motel room was silent, but it no longer felt suffocating. For months, I had been erased. For months, I had been mocked, ignored, and pushed aside, but now I had allies. Now I had proof. Now I had a plan, and soon Daniel and Vanessa would see me, not as the ghost they had tried to erase, but as the woman they had underestimated. The storm was coming, and I would be the one to bring it. The Burlington courthouse was buzzing long before I arrived. Word had spread, an elderly mother against her own son and his wife. The case had the taste of scandal, and the curious came to watch it unfold. Reporters lingered by the steps. Neighbors whispered in clusters, clutching their coats against the winter wind. Inside, the gallery filled with strangers waiting for a spectacle. I entered quietly, Sophia at my side. Her presence was steady, calm, like a lighthouse guiding me through dark seas. My heart pounded, but my steps didn't falter. At the defense table, Daniel sat stiff, his jaw tight, Vanessa beside him in a bright blazer that screamed arrogance. She leaned toward him, whispering something with a smirk. They looked smug, certain of their charm, certain that blood ties would protect them. But they didn't know what we had brought. They didn't know what was waiting on that USB. The judge entered. The gavel struck. Silence fell. Opening statements, the judge said. Sophia rose. Her voice was clear, firm, and unshaken. Your Honor, what we have here is not simply a family dispute. This is elder abuse, neglect, humiliation. A woman, Mrs. Margaret Hale, who gave her life to raising her son, was left abandoned, mocked, and stripped of her dignity in the very home she built. We will show proof that her mistreatment was not accidental, but deliberate. Proof that her son and daughter-in-law exploited her, erased her, and sought to destroy her. The gallery shifted. Murmurs ran through the benches. The defense attorney rose, his tone smooth, dismissive. This case is nothing more than a misunderstanding. Family tensions, nothing more. My clients, Daniel and Vanessa Hale, have cared for Mrs. Hale, and any suggestion otherwise is exaggerated, perhaps even fabricated. Families argue, families clash. That does not make them criminals, Vanessa smiled proudly. Daniel kept his eyes low. The judge nodded. Proceed. Sophia approached the evidence screen. She plugged in the USB, her movements precise. The video began to play. First, small clips. Vanessa rolling her eyes, tossing Edward's belongings into trash bags. Daniel ignoring my voice as I asked for help. Their laughter echoing in hallways. The courtroom grew tense, whispers breaking out among the onlookers. Then came Halloween. Vanessa appeared on the screen in a gray wig and shawl, the fake oxygen tube taped under her nose. She shuffled across the living room, pretending to limp. The guests roared with laughter, and then Daniel's voice cut through. It all. Look, it's Margaret the mummy, still clinging to life, haunting the house. The courtroom gasped. Some people shook their heads, disgusted. One woman in the gallery muttered, "How could they?" I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, but inside, my chest ached. Watching it again was like swallowing glass. The judge's face tightened. Enough, he said. But Sophia let the video finish. She wanted the ugliness laid bare. Sophia called Clara first. Clara walked to the stand, her chin lifted. She swore the oath and sat. Mrs. Hale came to me one night, she began. It was raining. She was soaked through, shivering. She told me she'd been locked out of her own home. I saw her with my own eyes, holding her bag, looking like a woman who'd been thrown to the street. The defense attorney rose. Are you sure she didn't misunderstand? Perhaps she misplaced her key? Clara's eyes flashed. She didn't misplace her dignity. They stole it from her. The gallery murmured again, louder this time. Next came the nurse. She recalled the day of my discharge. She called her son 5 times. I saw the look in her eyes when no one came. I asked if her family was on the way. She lied to me. She said yes. But I knew. I knew no one was coming. Her voice trembled, but her testimony didn't. The defense attorney shuffled his papers. His confidence had begun to fray. My clients may have made mistakes, he said quickly. But misunderstandings don't equal abuse. Families miscommunicate. Surely we can't call every argument or oversight abuse. The judge leaned forward, eyes cold. Misunderstanding? Dressing up an elderly woman as a Halloween joke? Locking her out in the rain after surgery? Laughing as she begged for help? You call that misunderstanding? The lawyer stammered. Daniel stared at the table. Vanessa's face flushed with anger. The courtroom shifted. The tide was turning. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, the room heavy with silence. Sophia guided me to the stand. My hands shook as I took the oath, but when I sat, my voice carried. I raised Daniel alone after Edward passed. I worked double shifts. I sold my engagement ring so he could go to college. I stayed strong at Edward's funeral so Daniel could cry. Every sacrifice I made was for him. I paused, letting the words hang. But when I needed him, when I needed a son, he wasn't there. He wasn't there at the hospital. He wasn't there at the door. He let them laugh at me, mock me, erase me from my own home. And all I ever wanted was to be loved, to belong, to be treated like I mattered. The gallery was silent. Even the air felt still. I looked at Daniel then, not as my son, but as the man who had betrayed me. You didn't just change the locks on the house, you changed the locks on my heart. And I can never open that door again. The judge leaned back, eyes hard. This court has heard enough. His voice filled the chamber like thunder. Mrs. Margaret Hale has proven her case. The evidence is overwhelming. Therefore, I rule that all property rights revert solely to her, as per her late husband's amendment. Furthermore, Daniel and Vanessa Hale are ordered to vacate the property within 30 days. In addition, they will pay damages of $300,000 for emotional harm, and a restraining order will be issued. Neither of you may approach or contact Mrs. Hale. The gavel struck. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Some applauded quietly. Others shook their heads at Daniel and Vanessa. Vanessa went pale, swaying before collapsing into her chair. Daniel stared at the floor, hollow, his pride stripped bare. I sat still, tears in my eyes, but not of sadness. These were tears of release. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt heard. Justice had spoken. I would no longer be their ghost. I would no longer watch silently from the shadows. I had the proof. I had the strength, and now I would act. They thought they had erased me, but they had only written the first chapter of my revenge. The house was silent when I stepped inside for the last time. The rooms still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The walls painted white from Vanessa's endless redecorating. But now, without their voices, without their laughter, the silence felt different. It wasn't oppressive, it wasn't mocking, it was hollow. I slipped off my shoes and walked barefoot across the wooden floor. My steps echoed through the hall. This was the house where Edward had built shelves with his own hands, where Daniel had taken his first steps, where I had rocked him to sleep during thunderstorms, where we had celebrated Christmases, birthdays, and simple Tuesday nights. But those memories were ghosts now, wandering among new furniture that didn't belong to me, new paint that had smothered Edward's touch. I stopped in the living room, the place where Edward's photo had once been. In its place sat Vanessa's vase, still as proud and empty as the day she set it down. And I knew. This house would never be mine again. Not really. I whispered into the silence. Goodbye, Edward. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door behind me. Instead of selling the property, I signed it over to a foundation called Haven of Silent Strength, a place for elderly survivors of abuse and abandonment. The director, a woman with kind eyes and weathered hands, shook mine firmly. You don't know what this means, Mrs. Hale. You're giving people more than walls. You're giving them a home. That word, home, landed softly this time. I packed only what I needed. Edward's journals, my sewing machine, a handful of clothes. I took one sunlit room in the Haven, modest but warm. A window overlooked the garden, where flowers would bloom again in spring. I set up my sewing machine in the corner, the steady hum of the needle reminding me of younger days in my Providence shop. Each stitch was a rhythm, each thread a reminder that broken things could be mended. But sewing wasn't enough. I wanted to build something lasting, so I turned one of the Haven's empty rooms into a sanctuary. Shelves lined the walls, journals stacked neatly. Women who lived there began to write their stories, of neglect, of abandonment, of survival. Each story was a scar, but together they became a tapestry of strength. I called it the Room of Remembering. It was a place where silence was broken, where women who had been erased could see their lives inked on paper, undeniable and permanent. Every time I walked into that room, I felt Edward's presence. He had always said stories were stronger than walls. Now I understood why. The Haven grew louder with time, not with cruelty, but with life. I taught sewing classes in the afternoons. My hands guided theirs through fabric and thread, the sound of stitching filling the air. In the mornings, we baked together, bread, pies, simple meals that filled the halls with warmth. Some women learned to balance checkbooks, others learned to write letters. Some simply learned to laugh again. There was no mockery here, no exclusion. Only chairs set at the table for everyone. Only voices rising together in shared songs of survival. The haven filled with laughter. And in that laughter, I found healing. But outside the haven, the world hadn't forgotten what Vanessa had done. The Halloween video leaked online, spreading like wildfire. At first, Vanessa tried to spin it. She started a GoFundMe, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive old woman. She begged strangers for sympathy, for donations. But the internet is merciless. Clips of her mocking me became memes. Screenshots of her fake oxygen tube were captioned with cruel nicknames: Vanessa the villain, oxygen fraud, mummy maker. Her fundraiser failed. Comments flooded with outrage and mockery. The empire of attention she had built online collapsed into ash. Daniel fared no better. Employers refused to hire him after the court ruling. His name trended once, not for achievements, but as a cautionary tale. Social media branded him Mama Evicta, the son who threw his own mother into the rain. Every time he walked into a store, he felt eyes on him. Friends drifted away. Invitations vanished. He became a ghost in his own town, just as they had tried to make me one in mine. The irony was bitter, but just. Months later, a journalist named Julia Chen contacted me. She wanted to hear my story, not as gossip, but as testimony. We sat in the garden at Haven. She recorded gently, letting me speak in my own words. I told her about Edward, about Daniel's first steps, about the lockout, the motel, the trial. When she published her article, it was titled, "The Mother Who Refused to Disappear." Letters poured into the Haven. Women wrote to say they felt less alone. Some said they found the courage to stand against their own silence. I hadn't set out to inspire anyone, but perhaps survival, when spoken aloud, always inspires. One evening, my phone buzzed. A number I still knew by heart, though I wished I didn't. Daniel's voice filled my voicemail. Low, broken. Mom, I don't know who I am anymore. Vanessa's gone. The house is gone. Everyone hates me. I don't even recognize myself. I miss something. I miss you. I don't know how to fix it. His words hung in the air after the message ended. I stared at the phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to replay it, to cling to the sound of the boy I once raised. But I didn't. I pressed delete. Not out of hate, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Some doors, once closed, must stay closed. One spring evening, I sat on the porch of Haven, a cup of tea warming my hands. The air smelled of lilacs again, blooming fresh after winter. Around me, women laughed in the garden. The sewing room hummed with new projects. The room of remembering grew heavier with journals by the day. I looked at the sky, painted gold by the setting sun. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I whispered softly, more to myself than to anyone else. I am not erased. I am rewritten. Every word is my own, and the world, for once, felt like it was listening. This was Margaret's story, one of betrayal, strength, and rebirth. It reminds us that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't on our bodies, but in the silence of those we love. But Margaret's life also shows something greater. No matter how cruelly we are erased, we can always rewrite ourselves. Dignity can be taken, but it can also be reclaimed. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever felt invisible, remember, you are not forgotten. For more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join me in giving voice to the silenced. Because here, every story matters, and sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths, and that brings Margaret's journey to a close. Her story is a reminder that even in betrayal, strength can rise, and no one can erase you unless you let them. If this story touched you, don't leave in silence. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if it spoke to you, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice, and truth. Here, every story has a voice, and the next one might be yours.